Hello and welcome to the second video that I've put out this week, where I break down all the fights taking place this weekend at UFC Mexico City from a betting perspective. Now, I've already covered one fight on this card, which you can find on my channel here. I've already broken down the fight between Claudio Puelles and Marcos Mariano, so if you haven't checked out this video already, please go and check it out. But in today's video, I will be breaking down another 3 fights, including the main event between Yair Rodriguez and Jeremy Stephens. So my channel's about to take a different direction. So this breakdown video that I usually do is very similar to all the breakdown videos you see me do in the past, where we talk about all the fights from a betting perspective. But if ever there's a fight taking place on a UFC card where I can use tons of footage to break a particular fighter down because they're either competing in the UFC for the first time and making their debut, or they've been competing outside of the UFC recently, so there's loads of footage available online that we can use without getting copyright flagged. Instead of doing breakdown videos like this, I will be doing more in-depth ones where I kind of go through the footage with you and give you my thoughts on what I'm seeing. So this breakdown video is probably only one of maybe 2 like this that I'm going to be putting out this week, and then the rest of the breakdown videos this week are going to be looking like this, because as you can see, there are tons of fighters competing on this card that are either making their UFC debut or they haven't been in the UFC for very long. We've got Askar Askarov, Vanessa Mello, Carlos Joaquin's only had 1 fight, Ariane Carnelossi is making her debut, Tyson Nam's making his debut, and of course we've already done the video on Marcos Mariano. So lots of more in-depth breakdown videos coming. I recommend checking this video out here to see what you can expect from future events. And yeah, that is pretty much it, guys. We're going to jump into the fights in a minute. Just a bit of housekeeping, because we are doing a lot more in-depth videos this week, and we're basically live streaming my entire research process and while I break down fights. I'm not going to have time to do a recap video this week where I go over my results from the last event, which is UFC on ESPN Plus 16, the event headlined by Donald Cerrone and Justin Gaethje. So I'm just going to run through the bets that I had on the last event very quickly to let you know how I did, but I'm not going to go into too much depth because I don't want this video to end up being super long. So I guess I had 3 bets on last weekend's card, but unfortunately one of the bets was voided because the fight between Andrew Sanchez and Marvin Vettori was cancelled when Andrew Sanchez pulled out due to sickness. Very disappointing. I got in nice and early on Marvin Vettori when he was around about 1.44. It was a big bet. I felt it was a rock solid bet. It was a bet I felt very confident in. So very annoying to see that fight cancelled. And then the other 2 bets that I had, obviously we spoke about in last week's breakdown videos, took a small 1-unit gamble on Donald Cerrone, which didn't pay off. Obviously he got brutally KO'd in the first round, and Justin Gaethje looked absolutely outstanding, but we knew that was a risk factor going in. That's why we capped the fight at 50-50. Obviously could have gone either way. And then the third bet that I had, I guess, to put me in profit for the night, was 2 units on Glover Teixeira to beat Nikita Krylov. Another high-risk bet, another bet that again could have gone either way, but we kept it small just in case Krylov got it done. But luckily for us, Glover came through in a very big way, so that gave us an overall profit of the night. Obviously this bet didn't count for anything. We got a refund because the fight was cancelled. We won 2 units on Glover at odds of 1.93. Take away 2, 1.86, obviously minus the 1-unit loss on Cerrone for just under a unit profit. So nothing special, nothing to blow your hair back, but any kind of profit is profit. At least it wasn't a loss. And this month, just as predicted, just as we talked about in the UFC 242 video between Poirier and Khabib, I mean, this entire month is a real grind. You know, at the beginning of every month, I tend to open up the fight cards for all the upcoming UFC events, and I scan through all the fights. So obviously in September, there's 4 UFC events, and I'll scan through all the fights taking place to kind of pick out, you know, how many strong positions we might get throughout the month, how many rock solid bets are going to be throughout the month, and kind of in my head just build a forecast for how I think the month is going to go. And like I said said to you guys in the UFC 242 video, this is a very difficult month for betting. You know, the last two cards haven't had many strong opportunities on it. I don't personally feel this card, UFC on ESPN plus 17, is going to have many strong opportunities on it. And I don't feel like UFC on ESPN plus 18, which is next weekend, is going to have many strong opportunities on it either. You know, this is really going to be a month that is completely different to last month. You know, last month we went 7-1 on bets. We made a giant profit. There were loads of rock solid positions for us to get our money in, and we obviously made a lot of money and did great. But this is one of those months where you have to batten down the hatches, keep it tight, and just try and get your money into strong positions. You know, you've got to take calculated gambles in a month like this where there aren't many other strong positions to put your money in. You know, you've got to take the value where there's value. But when you're rolling the dice and betting on guys like Donald Cerrone and Glover Teixeira, you're obviously going to incur a lot more losses than when you're betting on much more solid fighters like we had last month on guys like Corey Sandhagen. So, to be honest, September's one of those months where I'm just going to be happy to take any kind of profit. You know, so far I think I'm down like 1 unit on the month, which again is nothing major. I'd be happy with a small loss this month, if I'm being honest. Break even would be okay, and a small profit would be absolutely great, because like I say, it's a challenging month for betting on the UFC. And next week's card, you know, if we scan through the fights taking place, UFC on ESPN plus 17, I've already had, plus 18, next week's card, I believe is coming from Denmark. You know, if you just scan through the fights taking place here, there's no real strong positions jumping out at me either. So September's a tough month, but at the end of the day, we have made a profit in 7 out of 8 months. The only losing month we've had this year has been July, and we just got to keep on keeping on, chip away, and ensure that we keep things tight during tough months like this so we can finish the year strong. What we don't want to do is start getting really loose and start taking loads of gambles and putting our money in weak positions and eating into all the brilliant profits we've been able to accumulate up until this point in the year. So did all right on this event. Like I say, it's a tough month. In every event this month, any profit I make, I'm going to be happy with it. So just under a unit, you know, it's not great. It won't blow your hair back. But at the end of the day, a profit is a profit, and that is how I did. So big shout out to Glover for coming through for me. Oh, and I did mean to say, if you want a read of the reasons why I bet on each guy, how I capped them, etc., on my website, if you just go to mabettingtips.com, roll the mouse over community, go to chat rooms, down the bottom, you'll see a link for the article. If you open it up, you can read all my breakdown and analysis for these fights, you know, where the implied probability was, where I capped the fights, reasoning for betting either guy, and yeah, pretty much that is it. Check it out. So on to the next event. This is obviously UFC on ESPN plus 16, 17 even, I'm losing count, live from Mexico City. And of course, the biggest factor that we've got to take into consideration when we're betting on an event that takes place in Mexico City is how the fighters are going to deal with the high altitude climate of Mexico City, because high altitude can absolutely wreak havoc on a fighter's cardio and conditioning. Sports scientists say that it takes up to a month for the body to fully climatize to a high altitude climate. So, you know, the majority of fighters, when they go and fight abroad in a different country, they will only go to the city that the fight is taking place in on the Monday before the event. So they'll arrive on the Monday and the event will be on the Saturday, and then they spend all week in the fighter hotel. That's called fight week. Some fighters won't get there until the Tuesday or the Wednesday. So obviously, if fighters are arriving in Mexico City this week, it is far too late. Their body is not going to acclimatize the high altitude climate in time for Saturday night, which means fighters that haven't prepared correctly are probably going to struggle badly to perform to their full potential on Saturday night, because their cardio, conditioning, you know, athleticism, their power, their explosiveness is all going to take a big hit. So a big recurring theme in all my breakdown videos, all my betting analysis videos this week is going to be focusing on what each individual fighter has done to prepare for the high altitude climate. And we also spoke a little bit about that in the Claudio Puelles versus Marcos Mariano video that I put out yesterday. So the first fight that I'm going to talk about in today's video from a betting perspective is going to be Paul Craig against Vinicius Moreira. And straight away, the first thing that I wanted to talk about before we go into talking about how these guys match up stylistically is trying to gauge how both guys have prepared to compete at the high altitude climate of Mexico City. So Instagram's a good place to do that. Keeping an eye on what fighters have been posting. So here we can see 2 days ago, Paul Craig posted that he was in a museum in Mexico City. So we know that he was there 2 days ago, which would be, around 6 days out from the fight. But unfortunately, if you look at this picture here, it does say that 1 week ago, here's Paul Craig. He said that I've just had my last session before heading to Mexico City in the morning, and that was a week ago. So we do know Paul Craig is not prepared for the high altitude climate. Here we can see he's been training in Scotland. Doesn't matter if you're using altitude training, doesn't matter if you're back in training on top of some big mountain in Scotland, it will not prepare you for Mexico City. So Paul Craig is coming in, making a bit of a rookie mistake by not preparing at all to compete at altitude this weekend. That is a huge red flag. So then we look at his opponent, Vinicio Moreira, and we have less information from this guy. His last post was a picture 2 days ago congratulating Glover Teixeira on his win against Nikita Krylov last weekend. That doesn't give us any clues. And then here is a picture of him in his regular training camp. Don't know where this is. Presume it is Brazil. There's lots of Portuguese on the wall. And this was taken 3 weeks ago. So we don't know what Vinicius Moreira is doing to prepare. We don't know if he's in... We don't know if he's in Mexico City, if he's been there for the last few weeks. We don't know what he is doing. Obviously, another aspect of researching how fighters are prepared for altitude is to look at, the interviews they've conducted with the media where they've talked about their preparation, studied other social media profiles like Twitter and Facebook. But I couldn't find anything out about Vinicius Moreira's preparation. So please let me know if you know anything. Please leave a comment below. And also, Paul Craig has confirmed that he only will have started to travel to Mexico City about a week ago, which isn't enough time to prepare. So how do these guys match up from a stylistic point of view? Are there any betting opportunities on this fight? Well, this was one of the fights that did interest me when I began researching the card, because obviously both guys are roughly around even money, or they were around even money. Vinicius Moreira, his odds have actually declined in the last 24 hours a little. He was around even money, around minus 110 yesterday. And I can see why Moreira's odds have declined, because he was one of the first names that jumped out at me when I began scanning through this card, which is the reason why this is one of the first fights that I want to talk about, because it was one of the first ones I researched thinking there might be an opportunity on Moreira. And I like these kind of fights for betting, because at around about even money, when you see guys that, the bookmakers are pretty much capping it at around a 50-50 fight, if you can take a deep dive into a matchup like this and really analyse it and try and see if any fighter's got any kind of notable edge, quite often you can find value there, right? It's like Glover Teixeira, for example, last weekend. His odds against Nikita Krylov, they were roughly even all week. And, even though it was a very risky fight for Glover, because Krylov's very dangerous standing, Glover's extremely old, Glover's chinny, Glover's slow now. Going in that Glover has a gigantic advantage when it comes to grappling over Krylov. So you see odds are around even money, and you think, I can cap Glover at 60%. I can cap this fight at 60-40 due to Glover's notable advantages, significant advantages when it comes to grappling. So I do like to get really stuck into these fights that have got roughly even odds to see if we can find an edge. And that is what I was looking for here. And the reason why I instinctively jumped into this fight and instinctively thought that Moreira might have been a good bet is because both these guys are primarily grapplers. I do give Paul Craig an advantage when it comes to striking, but both guys are total chaos. Neither guy's very good striking. Moreira is very slow. He's got bad striking defense. Craig is also very slow. He has bad striking defense. I would say Craig's got the better technique offensively, but it ain't good. It's not good for either guy. I don't really want to talk about this fight in a striking capacity, just because it's fucking bad, guys. Both guys are bad when it comes to striking. I do give Craig the advantage striking, but please don't put too much weight on that, because both these guys are primarily grapplers and they want to be on the ground. They want to be on the ground in all their fights. Now, the interesting thing about this fight and why it's a little bit complicated is because both these guys will want this fight on the ground, but neither guy is a particularly good offensive wrestler. I would definitely say Moreira is the better offensive wrestler out of the two. Still very bad, but he's the better out of the two. But it's difficult to predict which fighter is likely to get the takedown and end up in top position, because both guys are just so happy to flop to their back, pull guard, go to the ground easily, that it's tough to say. You wouldn't bet your house on which guy is going to be able to initiate the takedown and get this fight to the ground. Now, this fight is super complicated because both guys are primarily grapplers, and while Paul Craig does have a few highlight reel submissions on his record, I do believe that Moreira is the better fundamental grappler, in the sense that Moreira understands the importance of being in top position. He understands that the fighter that is in top position is often the fighter winning the fight. But again, he's not good. He's not good. He's the better fundamental grappler for MMA, but he's not good. And both these guys will give up position a lot, chasing long shot submissions, particularly Paul Craig. And that's why I lean Moreira here. Just because I think in a fight that is likely to be primarily a grappling match, I think it will primarily be contested on the ground. I trust Moreira to spend more time in top position, because even though both guys give up top position, he understands the importance of being in top position more than Craig, who's happy to fight on the bottom and shows no urgency on the bottom to get back up or improve his position. So I lean Moreira. But what I'm trying to say to you is this fight is all kinds of bad. Again, neither guy has... It appears that neither guy is really correctly prepared to compete at the high altitude climate in Mexico City. So this fight could literally turn into a total shit show where both guys gas out after like 2 or 3 minutes. And then it just turns into a total slop fest and someone wins a messy decision. So... You know me, I'm always banging the drum about trying to find strong positions to put your money in, situations where there's a good amount of value. You know, it's okay putting your money at risk and placing bets on risky fighters. You know, we bet on Donald Cerrone last weekend, which was a big risk, and it's okay to do that if there's a good amount of value in the odds. But the problem with this particular fight is both guys are roughly around even money. You know, both guys, we got Moreira at an average of 1.83, which is minus 120 for an implied probability of 55%. We've got Paul Craig at, you can actually get him as an underdog now at around 2.0 plus 100, which is 50% implied probability. This is roughly a 50-50 fight, and these aren't the kind of guys that you would want to trust with your money. There are no strong positions here. Both guys are chaos. I wouldn't trust any of them. This is the kind of fight where, you know, this is exactly the kind of fight, two exact kind of fighters where, you know, a minute left to go in the third round. It could be 1 round apiece going into the third, a minute left from the end of the third round. Your fighter's in top position. You know, if he just maintains that top position for the final minute, he's going to win the fight 2 rounds to 1. He's going to win the fight 29-28. And both these jokers are the exact kind of fighters that would give up top position, chasing a long shot submission, end up on the bottom, and end up losing the fight 2 rounds to 1. So at even money, I am not interested in betting on either of these guys. Sorry to be boring, but it's an easy pass for me. Now we go into the next fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is going to be Martin Bravo against Steven Peterson in what is possibly going to be a loser leaves town matchup, because both these boys are going into this fight on the back of a 2-fight losing streak. Martin Bravo's lost his last 2 fights against Humberto Bandenay and Alex Caceres, and Steven Peterson has lost his last 2 fights against Alex Caceres and Luis Pena. So, you know what it means in the UFC when you lose 3 fights in a row. If you don't have any clout, you often get released from the promotion. and very, very good chance that the loser of this fight loses his job on Saturday night. So extra little bit of motivation for both these guys to show up and put in one hell of a performance. And how old is Martin Bravo in this picture? He looks about 12 years old. But of course, the running theme throughout these videos will be trying to evaluate how each fighter is prepared for the high altitude of Mexico City. So let's start with Stephen Timothy Peterson. And unfortunately, just like with Vinicius Moreira, we don't really know how he's prepared. There is a picture of him here in Mexico City. He went on a hike, and absolutely incredible view there. He went on a hike yesterday, which shows that, well, it was yesterday, which means, I'm guessing you wouldn't go on a hike the day you arrive in Mexico City. So he's been in Mexico City for at least 2 days, but tough to know, how long Peterson's been in Mexico City, what he's done to prepare for the high altitude. I've tried to find some interviews of Peterson online, can't find anything with him talking about how he is prepared for this fight. So please, again, if you do know anything about Stephen Peterson's preparation, please leave a comment below and share your knowledge with the community. We really, really appreciate it. And also, while we're at it, guys, if you are liking this video, please hit the like button below. It would mean a lot. It doesn't cost anything. It takes a second out of your day, and it helps me to know by how many likes the videos get that you guys like the content, you want me to keep producing it. Also, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to grow the channel, and it would mean a lot. So yes, we don't know what Peterson is doing to prepare. So he is a bit of an unknown, just like Vinicius Moreira, because if we look at it, he could have been in Mexico City since the beginning of Mexico, for all we know. Tough to say. But then Martin Bravo, much easier to figure out what he has been doing. He looks like he's actually been helping some of the guys that train at Alliance MMA with Jeremy Stephens prepare. Here we can see Jeremy Stephens. We'll be talking about him in a minute. Here is Brandon Moreno. This is Sahara Eubanks. This is Wilson Rice. Who else have we got in here? I'm sure Jose Quinones was in here. He's not, but of course Eubanks, Stephens. Who else do we say? Oh, Martin Bravo's there. Oh, here's Quinones and Bravo on the end. Here's Brandon Moreno. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fighters competing on this card who is in this picture, and of course Martin Bravo is in this picture as well. So this picture was taken on there's actually Angela Hill there as well, another UFC fighter competing in this weekend. So as you can see, Polo Reyes is there. He's competing this weekend. And this picture was taken on the 8th of September. So lots of clues in here. We can see that quite a lot of these UFC fighters that have an affiliation with Alliance MMA have been training in Mexico City for at least a week. And if we go further back, here we go. This is from the 24th of August. Very interesting. Here we can see Martin Bravo, Jeremy Stephens. Who else have we got? We have got Jose Quinones. Yes, very interesting. Anyone else for anyone else? So that is 3 weeks now, over 3 weeks. And here dating right back. It goes way back. Here's Steve. Look at this, guys. A month ago. This is Mexico City. Jeremy Stephens, Jose Quinones, Martin Bravo. So yeah, looks like these boys. And there we go. Here we go. The whole Alliance MMA team. Very, very nice. Here's the Alliance MMA coach. So yeah. And do we go even further back than that? We don't. But anyway, it looks like a lot of the guys from Alliance MMA, including Martin Bravo, have been training in Mexico City for at least a month, which means they have done their homework on how important it is to prepare your body for competing in a high altitude climate, and they are giving themselves the best chance of preparing, the best chance of performing their full potential this weekend. Very interesting. So another factor to take into consideration in terms of the preparation is that Marvin Bravo has previously fought in Mexico City for the UFC. He fought on the Dos Anjos Ferguson card all the way back in 2016 against Claudio Puelles. Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? There he is there in the Ultimate Fighter Latin American finale. So Martin Bravo has experience competing at altitude. He knows what to expect from it. He's felt it in his lungs before. So yeah, he seems to be well prepared. Steven Peterson, we're not so sure. So it's difficult to kind of measure how altitude's going to impact this fight, because Steven Peterson's usually a cardio machine. You know, fights at a high pace, very high output, high pressure fighter, likes to walk his opponents down, get in their face, and really, really test their cardio. It's very difficult to keep up with the pace that Peterson sets. And if this fight was taking place anywhere else in the world, I would give Peterson huge brownie points for that, because anywhere else in the world, I don't think Martin Bravo would be able to keep up with the pace that Peterson sets based on past performances. But with Martin Bravo clearly being well prepared to compete at altitude, Peterson may not be able to keep up the same pace that he usually does if he hasn't prepared. And of course, there's a big question mark over his preparation. So this is an interesting matchup, because this fight is likely to take place standing, because neither guy is a particularly strong offensive wrestler. Now, in terms of this fight from a striking point of view, I do believe Martin Bravo's got the better technique. He's the better boxer. But that can largely be negated by Peterson's high work rate. He can outwork Martin Bravo because he's constantly going to be coming forward. And it's exhausting to have a guy walk through your shots, keep walking you down and put a lot of pressure on you. You know, Martin Bravo is going to be under a lot of pressure here, and if you're not used to dealing with that style of fighting, it can be very, very difficult. Now, what's interesting is, even though I give Bravo the technical advantage, he does not have the best striking defense. He does get rocked, dropped, dinged, wobbled quite a lot. And even though Peterson's not particularly dangerous, not particularly a heavy-handed striker, it is something to think about, because Peterson has a granite chin. He's extremely tough. And even though he does take a lot of damage in his fights, his chin is never in question. So that's just something else to think about. And the reason why I think stand-up, this is a pretty close fight. Now, one area where Steven Peterson will have a huge advantage is on the ground. He's a much higher level grappler than Martin Bravo, but I don't expect that to be a factor here, because Peterson doesn't have the best offensive wrestling, and Martin Bravo's pretty good. So this will probably be a stand-up fight. So if we look at the odds, it's again another one of those fights that I love to dig deep into to try and find a good betting opportunity, because both guys are roughly about dead even at the moment. The odds are around 1.91 on both guys, which is minus 110 for an implied probability of 52%. So the bookies roughly cap this as a 50-50 fight, which means if you can really dig into this fight and find one guy with a significant advantage in any area, you know, win or lose, doesn't matter, that will give you an edge over the bookie, because remember, good bets don't always win, bad bets don't always lose. We're just trying to find strong positions to put our money and good value bets. So with this fight, it's an interesting one, because if this matchup was taking place anywhere else in the world, I'd be happy to cap Steven Peterson at 60-40 here, because anywhere else in the world, you know, at normal altitude, I feel that, you know, he's got the massive advantage when it comes to grappling. Definitely got the chin and toughness advantage. You know, there's not much chance that Bravo finishes him at all, whereas, you know, Bravo could be finished standing up or on the ground. The chin's a little bit questionable, ground game questionable. And also, I think that Peterson's just got a very difficult style to deal with. That pressure style can be demoralizing for a young, inexperienced fighter like Martin Bravo. You know, he's only 25 years old. He's only got 13 pro fights. You know, when your opponent won't stop coming forward, they're smothering you in pressure, walking through your shots, can be demoralizing. So Steven Peterson, way more experienced. He's got a lot of flaws, but he's a difficult style to deal with. But the problem is, whereas I'd be happy to cap Peterson at 60-40 and take a shot on him at these odds if the fight was taken anywhere else in the world, because, you know, odds are 1.91 minus 110. If we cap him at 60% with an implied probability of 52%, we're getting a nice 8% over the margin. I do feel that there are a few X factors at play here which make it difficult for me to get to that 60%. Of course, the first and most obvious advantage is that we know that Martin Bravo is prepared to compete at altitude, whereas we don't know what Peterson's done to prepare. the second X factor that makes me bring capping Peterson down from 60% closer to 50% is that Martin Bravo has home advantage on his side. He's Mexican, so many of Peterson's fights end up being close. If this fight ends up being close, the judges are more likely to give the nod to Martin Bravo. And then I guess those are two pretty significant ones, the preparation and home advantage. And that's why I just think, you've got to lower what probability you assign to Peterson winning this fight. And that's why, personally, I'm going to pass. If news comes out later on in the week that Peterson has actually been training in Mexico City for like the last month and he's well prepared for the altitude, etc., 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 I'll probably take a shot on him at these odds. But unless I get that confirmed, this is a pass for me, because either way, whatever happens, this is going to be a close fight. Steven Peterson's got that tough, gritty style where he always takes a lot of damage. His fights are always close, and while I do give him the edge, I need absolute confirmation of what he's done to prepare for altitude before feeling confident enough to take a shot on him, because this would be one of those high-risk bets, one of those 60-40 bets that could go either way. So that is that for that fight, guys. And we now go on to the main event of the evening, the fight that you probably all care about. There aren't too many fights to care about on this card if you're a casual fan, but as a bettor, you are just as interested in Yair Rodriguez versus Jeremy Stephens as you are in Claudio Puelles against Marcos Mariano, because of course, as a bettor of a sport, every single match or every single fight holds the same amount of opportunity until you dive in and research it. So of course, before we go into talking about the fight from a stylistic point of view, let us take a little look into how both guys have prepared. So obviously we already know from Martin Bravo's profile, Jeremy Stephens has been in Mexico City for at least a month. Here we can see him posting on the 18th of August, which was exactly a month ago today. There's no question here that Jeremy Stephens is well prepared for his fight in Mexico City. And also, Yair Rodriguez posted here on August 31st, which will be just over 3 weeks away. When the fight starts on Saturday night, he posted here talking about his preparation at altitude. I translated this in Google Translate. He's talking about preparing at altitude in Mexico. I won't bother translating it for you though, because it is a waste of time. You just take my word for it. So yes, Yair Rodriguez and Jeremy Stephens both respecting what high altitude can do to their cardio and conditioning, so they're both going to Mexico City earlier to train. And of course, Yair Rodriguez has the added benefit of already fighting in Mexico City multiple times. Can't remember exactly which cards took place in Mexico City, but if we have a look through, so okay, this is pretty cool. So Denver, Colorado is also a high altitude climate. So Korean Zombie competed in at altitude in his last fight. He also competed there in the main event of UFC Fight Night 92. Salt Lake City is also a high altitude climate, so the UFC love throwing him into high altitude matchups, and I know that he has competed in Mexico City for the UFC an absolute bunch of times as well. So Yair Rodriguez has got loads of experience competing at altitude. He knows exactly what to expect. He'll know how to get his mind and his body ready, whereas this will be Jeremy Stephens' his first rodeo, his first time competing at high altitude. Although Stephens is a cardio machine, we can see that he's respecting the threat of high altitude by going out to Mexico City earlier, and I trust Stephens will be alright on Saturday night. He is a consummate professional that appears to be preparing correctly, and he also, like I say, is a cardio machine that gets stronger as the fight progresses. So we don't really need to factor altitude and cardio into our decision making here. Should be pretty even with how these guys are preparing. So where do we begin with this one? So Jeremy Stephens was one of the first names that jumped out at me, along with Vinicio Moreira, when I began researching this event as a potential solid betting opportunity. And I was quite surprised to see that both these guys were around about dead even. Now the odds have declined on Jeremy Stephens in the last 24 hours, a little bit on some sites. I'm guessing that's because I did share a bet on Stevens with my members around 24 hours ago, and the odds always tend to decline a little bit when I put a bet out on my website. But when I saw the odds for this fight, I was quite surprised that Jeremy Stevens wasn't a bigger favourite. I was expecting to see him in the 1.60, 1.7 range, which would have been odds at around 1.67 to minus 167 to minus 143. That was the range I was expecting to see Stevens in, and to be honest, I'm kind of expecting him to close in that range. So there is value on Stevens at the moment, in my opinion, and I will explain to you the reasons why. So Stevens was one of the first names that jumped out at me, simply because on the very most basic level ever, Yair Rodriguez has a kicks-based taekwondo style of fighting, and generally speaking, guys with that style struggle against pressure fighters. And obviously Jeremy Stevens is a pressure fighter. We can think of some recent examples of this where we've seen it firsthand. Barboza is a kicks-based taekwondo fighter, struggling against Justin Gaethje. We've also seen Pettis, kicks-based taekwondo fighter, struggling against Ferguson and Nate Diaz. So there are examples here as to where it plays out. Jeremy Stevens, very aggressive, high-pressure style. Yair Rodriguez, kicks-based. It's generally, before you dive in, a potentially bad matchup for Rodriguez. That's why Stevens, before any research, his name jumped out at me. But your mind can play tricks on you. And sometimes when I research a fight, I'll completely change my mind on how I think it'll play out, and I'll actually favour the other guy. Or I'll see red flags and I'll be like, actually, I can see why the odds are what they are. I'm just going to pass. But on this particular occasion, when I researched this fight, it absolutely confirmed my suspicions, and I think there's absolutely value on Stevens at these odds. So before everyone goes out and rushes to bet Stevens, I want you to just hold on till the end of the breakdown, because this isn't one of those super solid bets like a Corey Sandhagen last month, where I'd be super surprised if Sandhagen lost. This isn't one of those kind of bets. This is one of those Donald Cerrone, Glover Teixeira type bets where I feel there's good value, judging by the odds, but it's risky. Yair Rodriguez presents some significant problems here, and it's not going to be a walk in the park for Stevens. So if you are going to bet Stevens, don't bet the house on him, don't bet the car, don't bet the dog, don't bet the wife, don't bet all your camels. It could go either way. But in terms of what the odds are, there's definite value. But this is a month of having to put your money into slightly riskier positions. There's still value there, but they're not super strong, rock solid positions where you'd be mega surprised if the fighter you bet on lost. So just bear that in mind. Now, the reason why this is a bad stylistic matchup for Yair Rodriguez is simply because he is a taekwondo-based fighter that does have a kicks-based style of fighting. So he needs time and space to get his kicks off. He needs time and space to plant his feet and uncork his kicks. And Jeremy Stevens, like most pressure fighters, does not give you that time and space. He will constantly come forward, walk Rodriguez down, pressure Rodriguez, and he won't give Rodriguez the time and space he needs to get his kicks off, which makes Rodriguez significantly less dangerous. In order to shut down a pressure fighter like a Jeremy Stevens or a Nate Diaz or a Justin Gaethje, what you basically need, you need one of three things, preferably all of them. Generally speaking, one isn't going to be enough. You kind of need 2 out of 3, preferably all 3. First thing you need decent boxing, because with boxing you don't need as much time and space to throw a punch as you do a kick, right? Yair doesn't have that. Yair's not a particularly very good boxer. Like most taekwondo guys, he's not a very good boxer. If you go back and watch my breakdown video for the Nate Diaz Anthony Pettis fight, where we bet on Nate Diaz as an underdog, we recommended a bet on Diaz. This is exactly the same rationale for betting on Stevens. Pettis isn't the best boxer. Rodriguez isn't the best boxer. Taekwondo guys don't tend to be the best boxers because it's all kicks based. So when Stevens is coming forward with a lot of pressure, Yaya doesn't have the boxing to back him up. Just doesn't. The second thing you need to be able to do is you need a lot of footwork. Now, this was one of the areas that I was most surprised, and another reason why fight research is so important, because your mind will play tricks on you. You'll kind of have a perception of a fighter in your head, how they look, what they're good at, what they're bad at, and then when you go back and watch footage of them in the cold light of day, you realise that that's not true at all. And this was one of the major surprises for me that really pushed me into betting on Stevens, because I had this memory of Rodriguez being light on his feet, lots of footwork, lots of flim-flam, being quite tricky, very mobile, very athletic. It's the complete opposite. If you go back and watch his last few fights, Rodriguez is actually very flat-footed, very, very flat-footed, doesn't use much footwork at all. And that is a problem, because he's so flat-footed, he stands so heavy on his lead leg that it will leave him wide open to Jeremy Stevens' vicious leg kicks. I mean, we saw what Stevens did to Gilbert Melendez with those leg kicks. Almost had the fight stopped with via leg kicks. So that's the second thing you need. Footwork, boxing. The third thing you need is an ability to counter-strike and fight. Basically, land on your opponent while moving backwards, which is an extremely difficult skill. It is not something that many guys in the UFC can do. It's very, very difficult to land effective strikes while moving backwards. And I can tell you that Yaya absolutely can't do that. So you usually need 2 out of these 3 things, preferably all 3, to take on a high-pressure fighter. Like Jeremy Stevens, based on past performances, Yaya doesn't have any of those things, which is why this is a tough stylistic matchup for him. And I actually think Stevens' boxing is at such a better level than Rodriguez that I actually think there's a very good chance that Rodriguez gets knocked out in this fight. If you go back and watch his last fight against Korean Zombie, he got lit up bad by Korean Zombie. He took a hell of a lot of damage. He was busted up very badly in that fight. And trust me, Stevens hits a hell of a lot harder than Korean Zombie does. Because what happens is, if you look at a guy like Yair, when Stevens is coming forward, Yair's hands are down by his side, and he's looking to turn the hips and uncork a spinning attack. But the punch from Stevens is coming right down the middle in his face, and he can't get the kick off in time. That's why this is a bad stylistic matchup for him. Now, I do think Stevens is a good bet, because if we look at this fight, current average odds available on Stevens, I bet him yesterday when he was around about 1.93, which is minus 107. He's now down to about 1.87, which is minus 115. So hasn't really changed that much. Started to decline though. But the current odds of 1.87, which is minus 115, give him an implied probability of 53%. I personally cap Stevens at around 60%, which gives you a nice 7% approximate margin over the bookies. Now, the reason why you can't get crazy and cap Stevens at better than 60% is because there are a few areas here where Yair can cause him problems. We will talk about those things now. There are some risk factors here. Of course there are risk factors. There are risk factors with every bet, which is why it drives me crazy when guys leave comments like, such and such fighter is going to 100% win. See what happens. There's no way the other guy has got a chance. That drives me crazy, because every bet has got risk factors. On any given night, anyone can win. So the risk factors, which lead me to capping this fight at 60% in favour of Jeremy Stevens, are as follows. The first one, and most obvious, is home advantage. Yair Rodriguez is a popular Mexican fighter. This fight is taking place in Mexico City. If any of the rounds end up being remotely close, judges are more likely to lean towards Yair Rodriguez. That's the first risk factor. The second risk factor is potential improvements that Yair Rodriguez could have made. He's only 26 years old. He's likely to be improving at a very rapid rate, and he hasn't actually fought that much over the last 3 or 4 years, so we haven't really seen too much of him. Based on past performances, he doesn't have the boxing, the footwork, or the counter-striking ability to deal with Jeremy Stevens' forward pressure. However, at 26 years old, he should be making big improvements from fight to fight. So who knows, he might show up with 2 out of those 3 skills that would give him a much better chance of beating Stevens. It's unlikely because we haven't seen him demonstrate those skills in the past, but it's not impossible. Another obvious risk factor here with betting on Stephens is the possibility of a flash KO. Yair Rodriguez has, very, very dangerous spinning attacks, very, very dangerous kicks. He carries legit KO power in every kick, very dangerous, very explosive, very athletic. That is obviously always going to be a risk factor. A flash KO can happen in any UFC fight, especially with a guy as dangerous as Yair Rodriguez. And the final red flag, or not red flag, I guess it is a red flag, the final risk factor with betting Stephens, and perhaps the one that bothers me the most, and is perhaps tied into home advantage a little bit, is the fact that Stephens knows he's got the power to hurt his opponents bad. He's got a lot of highlight reel KOs on his record. And you can see Stephens is one of those guys that when he lands on his opponent, they have a look in their eyes like, holy shit, I don't want to eat another one of those. He's just got that power in his hands that terrifies his opponents. And the problem when you've got that kind of power is that you can often fall into the trap of headhunting. And this is something that Stephens does occasionally fall into. There's a great quote from Chael Sonnen where he said that when you try and win a fight by knockout, you often end up losing a decision. Because when you're trying to take your opponent out by landing that kill shot, in between the time where you're trying to land that kill shot, your opponent's racking up strikes, chipping away at you, outlanding you and outworking you and winning the rounds. And Stephens does occasionally fall into that trap. Now, the asterisk next to that is perhaps it isn't a risk factor, because in order to punish Stephens for headhunting, you've got to be an effective counter striker, so that when Stephens is coming forward with lots of pressure looking to land a kill shot, you've got to have the footwork, the technique, the ability to fight backwards to pick him off as he's coming forward. Edson Barboza style. Edson Barboza is one of those taekwondo guys that is very good at landing effective strikes while moving backwards. Rodriguez doesn't have that in his locker, so it is a risk factor for Stephens, the fact that sometimes his output's really low, but maybe it won't play a factor here because I'm not sure if Rodriguez has got the footwork and counter-striking to make him pay. And also another risk factor, which I guess I've got to mention, is that Rodriguez does have experience competing at high altitude, whereas Stephens doesn't, although it does appear Stephens is very well prepared, and Stephens is also a cardio machine that gets better as the fight progresses. So that is it for this breakdown, boys, of that fight. I do think Jeremy Stephens is a good bet this weekend. It is certainly not a rock solid bet. It is certainly not a bet you want to be going huge on. But the way the odds are laid out at the moment, the bookies are capping this as a 50-50 fight, and I disagree with them. I think Stephens deserves more respect than that. I think this is a difficult stylistic matchup for Yair. I think there's a significant chance Yair gets knocked out here because the skill gap in boxing is so great. For that reason alone, Stephens deserves a little bit more respect than the bookies are giving him. But as we can see, the odds are starting to correct. I tipped him to my community last night. And as you can see, yesterday he was around about 1.93. He's now down to about 1.87 on most sites. I do believe it's quite likely Stephens' odds will continue to decline and probably close somewhere around 1.67, 1.70, something like that, which would be in the territory for all the Americans of about minus 143. So that is it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't go too big on Jeremy Stephens. It is a bet that carries a lot of risk, but at the end of the day, we don't care about individual bets. We're not trying to win individual bets. We will place hundreds of bets over the course of the year, and our goal is to just win a hell of a lot more than we lose. And on any given night, anything can happen. Rodriguez can for sure win on Saturday night, okay? So don't go too big, don't go crying about it if Stephens loses, but there's a decent amount of value in his odds. So if you like today's video, guys, please hit the like button below. Like I say, it helps the channel grow. It would really mean a lot to me if you could do that. And also, please also subscribe if you haven't already. And I've also put out a load of different types of videos this week and last week. Please go check them out. Let me know in the comments which type of videos you like, which type of videos you don't. Do you like the weigh-in videos? Do you like the live research streams? What do you think of the latest type of videos that I've been posting? Let me know in the comments below, and the videos that you like I will do more of. And keep an eye on the channel, guys, because I will be live streaming a lot this week. I've got 5 live streams coming up this week as we take a deep dive into all these debutants like Vanessa Mello and Askar Askarov. So keep an eye on the channel. Plenty more videos, plenty of live streams coming this week. I promised you boys, as soon as this was set up, this channel was going to go to the next level. Hopefully we can all make some money on Saturday night. I truly hope you have a great week. Go out there, punch this week in the dick, get after it, and I will see you all very soon.